Thanks, Mr Speaker. You know, I was going to move an extension of time, but I thought his backbench would have killed me. Back there, sitting there like house bricks without the animation, all the enthusiasm. And the reason they're feeling that way over there is that they know full well that ultimately the Prime Minister has not been capable of providing the economic leadership our nation needs. That's exactly where we've ended up. There is no longer a point to this Prime Minister. There is no longer a point to this government. How out of touch would you have to be to think you'd get away with this? That you might think, oh, there's some budget measures I won't be questioned on, there's some I might not need to know the cost of, but it's a fair bet you ought to know the centrepiece. It's a fair bet. Of all the measures that you might think, oh, maybe there's a figure I should carry in my head, it's the centrepiece of the budget. That's not a bad starting point. And so yesterday we had— I loved hearing today the Treasurer complain, why aren't you asking more questions to me? Because every time yesterday we asked, what's the cost, he wouldn't say. And we thought it was, oh, maybe they haven't modelled it. We thought maybe they have been so incompetent that they never even checked what the cost would be. Maybe they are so hopeless at their job that it never occurred to them when they were giving money to the big end of town to even bother to check little details like what would the cost to the budget be. But it turns out, from the answers the Prime Minister has given today, they did know. They knew full well. They know the answer to this question, and they think they can get through from today all the way to the 2nd of July and keep it a secret from the Australian people. They think the choice that they have made to prioritise the big end of town over families, over schools, over the health system with Medicare, they think they can get away with costing their cuts over 10 years, with spending the beginning of this week talking relentlessly about 10-year projections, and now say they reckon they can get all the way to the 2nd of July and not touch it at all on, of all measures, their budget centrepiece. Because the problem is they don't want to talk about their budget centrepiece at all anymore. The amendment that was moved by the Prime Minister doesn't mention the budget centrepiece. It's as though it's gone. It's to take all references to that tax cut out of the motion. That's what the Prime Minister's moved. And not only has he moved it in his own handwriting, he's then added that we won't just support it, he's done the little addition, and welcomes. It's an emotional thank you as we get rid of any reference to the centrepiece of his own budget. When the Prime Minister was describing the centrepiece of his own budget, he deliberately didn't even tell the full story, not only of the cost, but of the measure itself. He talked about small businesses growing. Here's the figures he said: to 10 million, to 25 million, to 50 million, to 100 million, and then he stopped there. But the budget plan doesn't stop there. Doesn't stop there at all. Sure, right now and last year, under the Abbott government, we had the establishment on a bipartisan basis of the small business tax rate. We've got bipartisan agreement that the small business tax rate should be lowered. But what they want to do is change the definition of small business every year. And it doesn't stop where the Prime Minister stopped. Over the next 7 years, we end up with eligibility for the small business tax rate going to businesses worth $1 billion. $1 billion! I've got to say, in the history of this nation, there has only ever been one Prime Minister who would regard that as a small business. It's only ever happened once, and it's happened here. These budget documents that we've been presented with this time around are extraordinary. My favourite, I've got to say, is making multinationals pay tax on what they earn in Australia, with a little picture of a map of Australia and a picture of an island tax haven. They've actually put it in their own budget. I've got to say, I don't know what that island might be. I don't know what's been presented in there, and I expect there'll be a public servant who'll pay for the graphic design very dearly at some point in time. Budgets are about choices, and when they say, well, why should we have to tell you what the 10-year projection is? The answer's simple. They've told us what their 10-year cuts are. They told us from the start what the 10-year cuts would be to hospitals, what the 10-year cuts would be to schools. We know what the 10-year projections are on the cuts that they give to families. We know that this is in the context of a budget where they put off all their talk of childcare. Remember at the hearing that workplace participation was going to be the key. All pushed off in this budget, all pushed off, all gone. And that's gone because choices have been made. And the choices that they have made are fundamentally different to the choices that a Labor government would make. Fundamentally different. When you get now, if it is, as we were told, well, maybe it's $55 billion, as though it's small change between friends. If it is that, that is bigger than the entirety of the education cuts. Bigger than the entirety. In the order of the cuts to hospitals. The money we are talking about here, it's not like it's just a free kick of spare change to business. This government has decided who it will help and who it will hurt. And while they've wanted to say, oh, it's some sort of class war, it's not that. It simply runs against the grain of an old-fashioned concept of Australian fairness. That's what it runs against. Because the benefits, it's not like they're going to the top half of Australia versus the bottom half of Australia. It's going to about the top 2% of Australia. And the rest of Australia, at best, gets $6 a week. At best. And that's only if you're somebody who doesn't have a family. Because, of course, even at the top of that 87 area, 87,000, where they've got the shift in the name of bracket creep, if you're a single parent working on $87,000 a year with 2 high school kids, you, even after you've had that tax benefit, are still $4,500 behind. That's the choice that's been made. And I'm sure they're out there thinking, oh, but I've got my $6. I've got my $6 a week. That's the choice that's been made. That's before they get to the reality of someone who brings in $1 million in a year being $17,000 better off. The concept of saying, would we like taxes to be lower, doesn't answer the question when you also have to say, is the price of that an attack on every family in Australia? Is the price of that you're going to gut what we were told before the election was a bipartisan approach on school funding? When we were told before the election that pensions would not be changed, and then we saw a government come in here that budget after budget has tried in every different way to cut the pension. That money that is being cut from them is the same money that now goes to billion-dollar companies under their plan. And that's why. That's exactly why they don't want to say the number out loud. Well, it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for people. It doesn't take much for people to be able to say they know the priorities of those opposite. We know that those opposite of the Australian people know that the government was given a choice, and they chose the top end of town over the vast majority of Australia. That's the choice they made. And the price of that is if you're a pensioner, you get cut. If you're a family, you get cut. If you're sick, Medicare goes backwards, hospitals go backwards. If you believe in jobs and growth, no one delivers jobs and growth by cutting education, cutting infrastructure and making the internet slower. No country in the world would try to do that. But that's the prescription that's offered by those opposite. Mr. Speaker, what we have today is not the opposition choosing some corner of the budget to debate. We've gone directly to the budget centrepiece, and the Prime Minister believes he can get away, even though he knows how much it'll cost, with not letting the rest of Australia know how much it'll cost. They know the cost of the cuts. They know the price of the cuts is this benefit to the big end of town, the redefinition of small business, all the way up to companies with $1 billion turnover. It's about choices, and when the choices those opposite make are against the vast majority of Australians, Labor stands proudly against them.